Today I have Aalex Mandel-Dallal with me. Alex is a writer and comedian, and in the world of comedy, it's Alex spelt with a double A, which I love. That's really fun. So Alex, let's start there. When and why did you decide on the double A?
Hi. Yes, so the double A came for quite a few reasons. Firstly, it's how my dad says my name. My dad's from Iraq. And the way that he says my name is pronounced Aalex. And growing up, it was an ongoing joke with my friends that whenever he called the home phone, whenever they called the home phone and he answered, he was like, Aalex, and trying to get my attention in the house because that's how old I am. I had a home phone. And then when I was developing everything, like when I was writing more, and then when I was finding myself doing a lot more comedy, on bills, I noticed there's always a lot of Alexes. So to kind of differentiate myself, I've given myself two A's. And then also that puts me higher up in searches as well. And that's totally transparent. Yeah.
That's smart. I love it. And Alex, I know you through watching your solo comedy show, Let She Be. Which is a super interesting show that we're going to really dig into. But before we dive into that, is there anything else that people should know about you and your connections to creating comedy?
So I think in terms of things that people should know, they should come to see me. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I've done performing. I perform a lot, and then most of my material is personal development based. Because that's what I feel like I know a lot about. And then most of my shows are in relation to subjects and things like reflections that I've had based on that. Yeah.
I think that's super interesting that I really took that away from your show, Let She Be, the sort of all the themes that are linked to self-development. And I know it's such a keen interest of yours. And I know that's also that the self-development started before your interest in comedy. So I'm really curious, how did you get from that exploration into comedy? Because that interest could have gone in many different directions. So why was it comedy that became the route?
So I think if I were to go back, I go into lockdown. In lockdown, I did a lot of, I got put on furlough from the job I was in. I was working hospitality. I got put on furlough and suddenly I inherited all of this time. And that was my opportunity to just kind of be like, who am I? What's going on? Because I think at that point I was a bit lost in my career and what I was doing. So weirdly, it was hard to say, but like to refer to it as a blessing in disguise. But that's what the inherited time was, like a gift. And in that time, I looked at myself, my values, things that I cared about, my passions, and everything kind of pointed to comedy. I dabbled before, and then I just kind of assessed everything in my life. And then it just kept on going back to comedy. So if it was to be anything to do with like my values or anything like that, or I was able to connect everything to comedy because it can be so reflective, and you have to be so self-aware. And I realized then that it was just like, it was a gift that would just kind of keep giving without sounding incredibly cheesy, which I do.
Oh no, I don't think that's cheesy at all. And when you say that comedy for you is that space of being able to be self-reflective, what does that look like for you? Because, for example, there may be lots of people who are interested in self-development, who journal or who keep a diary or who kind of ask themselves different reflective questions. But that doesn't then get you to comedy. So how did you... That's like such an interesting starting point. But what do you think it was that for you that meant that then you are in the place where you're at now, where, you know, you do live spots of 5 and 10 minute material. You have this like fully developed narrative show that you've already taken to Edinburgh. What do you think are some of those steps craft wise that get you from that sort of introspection to something that you can then share? I know that's a really big question, so you can come at it from any way you want to.
I'll 100% go on a tangent as well.
Go
and
for
then
it.
I'll ask you the question again.
I love a tangent.
Because that's the way my brain works. I don't think that, I mean, everyone will come to different conclusions when self-reflecting, but it has to be you have to be totally honest with yourself. And I think that because I had so much time to think in lockdown, there was so much who am I moment. There was so many of those moments. It just kept on going back to me realizing that I was constantly thinking, like, what do I keep doing? What is something that I do in every situation? And it was always like trying to make people laugh. Most of the time, well, at that point I was in a corporate job as well. And I was like, what made that job what made me enjoy the job the most was when I was found myself in like a boardroom with people that were all doing serious business things and just cracking jokes to them. And then I was like, oh, there's something in that. And then is what made me that's what kept me making me want to go back to comedy. Yeah. This is the moment that I'm going to ask you the question again.
Yeah, no, it was a big question. So I was wondering, really, basically, like what are some of the steps that mean that you can go from that sort of quite private, introspective process of, for example, if it is journaling or being self-reflective, to being able to literally stand up on a stage and share it, which is super scary. Like what does that process look like for you to be able to make it something that's then externalized?
So yeah, the process is, I think everyone's got their own process and the way that they process moments that happen in their life. But now with comedy, what I do is I write notes. Like if something, even if it doesn't have to necessarily be funny, but if something significant happens in my life, I'll usually keep going back to it. The notes come the notes probably mostly come when I observe something that's quite funny, and I take a note of it and then I'll go back to it later. But in terms of my life, usually when big things happen, I intend to write about them, but I have to process them first. That's something that I learned when writing Let She Be originally. So Let She Be was an idea for a show that in lockdown, I just wanted to make a show. I was like, that's going to be my goal. I want to be a comedian and I want to create a show. I want to take it to Edinburgh. And I was like, that was the only idea. There was no premise. There was no... and then the only premise that came to mind was girl living alone in lockdown, because I did live alone. Girl living alone in lockdown that slowly loses her mind. And it was just like I went on my own personal journey because I had so much time alone. I don't think I emphasised that before, that I lived alone. So there was most people had like time to self-reflect, but with a partner or a flatmate or a family member. But I really did have just a lot of time on my own, and so it actually ended up in me having what I call, on reflection, a lockdown breakdown. Which happened one night when when lockdown was easy and a friend came over, and I just had like this outburst of emotions and really like kind of big, I don't know, I call it a big cry. Or it just really does depend on the way that you look at the situation, but that's what the show is about, because the moment happened, I didn't think anything of it. I was developing a show. I didn't know what that show was. 6 months later, I listened back to, at the time of it happening, what I need to emphasize is that I recorded it. And that was very much a personal development thing, because in that moment, it felt like my truth. So I thought that recording it was the way to kind of reflect on it and understand it better at a later stage. And then when I did listen back to it 6 months later, I realized I had time to kind of heal. And then I realized at that moment that it wasn't as serious and like really, really like personal and like there wasn't so much pain in there. Instead, I feel there was a lot of humor in it. And that goes back to, I guess, what I was saying before, whereas the kind of humor in everything I'm doing, even when I'm having a little breakdown. Yeah. So that was the process for that. But it took 6 months to listen back to it. Then I did the mad thing was like, so I listened back to it in July, and then booked in to get a group of people into a room when we could in August, I think 2021, which was what I call the work in progress, which at that point I didn't even know what work in progress was. I thought you just performed a show and that was it, which is so naive. But I really did think that. And then, so the work in progress was chaos. And it was me just playing that recording out to an audience full of a combination of strangers who just wanted to be out, and who were friends of friends, and my friends and my members at my job, because I work front of house at a co-working space. So I invited a lot of my members, which was a very bold move considering the nature of the show and what I was doing. So that was my way of making a step in a time that I couldn't actually. Everything was so limited in terms of performing stand-up. I took kind of matters into my own hands and just put on my own show it was actually essentially just an empty room, and I made it into, used a light in there as a light for a stage. And then we just arranged the chairs so it looked like it was meant to be a venue for comedy, when really it was just an event space that was at that moment like hardly used at all because we couldn't have any events. Long-winded answer, but maybe answering your question, hopefully.
Yeah, totally. And that was a bold move, which I love. And I have so many questions about that event, because I still think it's just an incredible leap, which I love, like this leap of courage, leap of boldness, leap of faith to go and make that show and share it in that way. If you're thinking about like you said that you liked cracking jokes when you were in the conference room, and I'm curious about like where that impulse comes from, whether it's like breaking the tension or bringing a different energy, like what that is, and what the impetus was also to actually share your show and not keep it as something that's private. What made you really want to do that? And are they the same thing? So kind of multi-layered question, like what do you think it was that was making the Aalex in the conference room want to crack those jokes? And what do you think it was that made the Aalex want to share like what could be very private material with strangers and co-workers?
I think that it's two separate. Well, it's two separate things, but it's also the same. So the cracking jokes, So the cracking jokes in the conference situation, that would usually happen when I felt maybe socially uncomfortable or just generally uncomfortable, like I was in the wrong place, because what my default would be to make me feel like I'm in the right place would be to crack a joke, because then I'm suddenly like, oh, they're laughing, therefore they're at ease and I'm at ease because they're laughing in that situation. I don't know if that's clear, but yeah, I think that's what I have always tried to do, or always ended up doing in some way, shape or form, even if it's like being told to create a formal form for something and then putting like a weird pun in it. Not just because like no one, or a sign, like if you're like, oh, can you tell people to wash up their dishes? It's like, oh, let's put a pun in it. Let's make it silly. Let's personify the sink, you know? And then the other half of the question was, so the listening back to, so the lockdown breakdown is how I've chosen to refer to it. And the decision to play it out to an audience, or several audiences, was when I was just like, that is my truth. There is no other. It was like the rawest form of me. Like I'm not like in the moment when it happened, it was me and one friend in the room. And like, I have edited it. You're not just going to get, there's a lot of tears. So it's not just like the whole thing. And it just felt like, the only thing that I could do in that moment. And I think before that I had told people that it had happened and that I had recorded it. And they were like, that's a mad thing to do. And I was like, yeah, it was, I guess. But then the choice to actually play it out only came, I think I set the goal of getting everyone into a room beforehand. And then when getting everyone in for the work in progress beforehand. And then I had it booked in, and then I listened to the recording and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this. I've got to play this out, because even if it didn't become the show, that moment in that room would have been really significant for me, because I think I would have pushed my boundaries. And I think everything was a fair bit easier after that, because I did that. And also bear in mind the timescale, because it was in like lockdown. And I remember that room because everyone just wanted to be entertained because we'd all been locked up for so long.
Yeah. And this is not an easy question, but what kind of craft do you think you're bringing to it, or sort of energy or structure do you think you're bringing to it to set the context for it being something that is entertaining, as opposed to, say, something that is intrusive or just painful? Like, what kind of things do you think you're doing as a comedian? Because I've seen your show and I can definitely see that you're making it easy for us to laugh in a way that if we didn't have any context, or we didn't have you like facilitating it, it could just be painful. Like, how do you think you act as a bridge on stage to let us know that it's okay to laugh and to point us in the direction of the funny?
I think a really good way of explaining how I think I've done this, or how I try to do that, is from a huge mistake that I made in one of the work in progresses that I did. So after I would say that the first work in progress was a success, even because it was so raw, and it had to be live, it had to be like reactive. And then I did another work in progress shortly after that, maybe a month or two after that. And I didn't give the audience, I don't know what I did, and I recorded it, but even looking back, it's just, I didn't really communicate what was about to happen. Most importantly, I didn't give the audience permission to laugh. It felt like before I played it out, I just didn't set it up properly. So what that was me playing my breakdown to a room full of people, but not setting it up. So therefore, a load of people feeling incredibly uncomfortable and in many ways triggered. And people still talk to me that came to that show about that show. It was just like, wow, that was a lot. And it really was, because it was just like, and it was like giving people permission to laugh is something that I'll emphasize, but it's not necessarily being like, hello audience, I give you permission to laugh. It's saying like, this happened to me. This is my personal experience. I've reflected on it. And I've chosen to play this out for essentially the audience's comic relief, but it's I think that the advantage that I feel that I'm at is like the self-reflection and all that work that I have tried to do, and the things that I've learned to hopefully be able to communicate that to an audience so that they can maybe reflect on their I think the way that I referred to it when writing the show description was give audiences a sense of relief for their wobblies, hopefully. And that's very ambitious because especially when talking about mental health, mental health is incredibly important to me, and but something that I am able to talk about. So like if I'm processing something or something's happening to me in that moment, I will be quite honest and talk to people about it. And that's not something that people can always do. And that's not to say like, not to the point where it makes people uncomfortable, but like I think that I'm able to do that. So if I'm able to do that to strangers and to people on stage, hopefully I hope that will give them permission to feel like they can talk about something that maybe felt like they couldn't talk about before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And for people that haven't seen your show, I think it might be helpful to give an example of something within the tape that you were able to find funny in hindsight at the time. So is there an example? I don't mean like having to give an exact line or anything, but is there something that you could share about at the time it felt potentially one way, but then looking back and playing the tape, you're able to frame it a different way for us, that we could be like, oh, it's quite funny that I did or said this or had this take? What would be an example of that? The thing about the tape or the recording of it is it was super random. Like the things that went through my mind in that moment, it was just like, it was very surreal in that like I would be talking about one thing 1 minute and then I'd start talking like analysing the game of football the next, because I was in a crazy headspace. And there was one point where I was specifically talking about I was specifically talking about one thing, and I was leaning into that thing, and I was really getting upset about that one thing, and just getting very upset and talking about it. And then I hear a dog barking in the background, which really happened. And then I just start, and then because my brain is in like intense crying, everything is upsetting me mode, I then
started talking about how much I want a dog, how sad I was that I didn't have a dog, how I couldn't have a dog because I didn't have a partner, but I really wanted a dog, but I can't. And then I just kept going. Then it was just me just crying my eyes out about how I really wanted a dog.
Right.
And then that was like a specific moment in it. I think, I lost track of the question. I do that a lot. I'm very sorry.
No, it totally makes sense. So, because I was asking about what would be an example that would show how you can, like, put your finger on why, like, how you reframe it as something that's funny. And like you say, I think there is something in that randomness, the undercutting, that you were really deep into one thing. And then, like, how our brains can work sometimes under pressure. It's almost like, oh, squirrel, there's a dog. Oh, and here's all the reasons why the dog. And now we're talking about the dog. Let's talk about the partner too. And that's like that pile-on that is, like at the time, so painful. Like when we like zoom out on it, it does seem like quite a funny random pattern that the brain is capable to be so intensely focused and passionate about something else and then do a complete like 90 degrees and be somewhere else. So I think maybe in seeing those sort of random patterns as well, there could be some real fun in that.
Yeah, but honestly, the most incredible thing, the most powerful thing about the whole experience of doing this, and I'm taking it to Edinburgh again this year, but in a different format. With a different name as well. It's still talking about this, still working around the specific recording, but I'm at a different point in my life now where I'm reflecting on it, which is something I'll talk about in a second. But what I have found, the most powerful thing, as I was saying, is the conversations that I've had with audience members afterwards, where they've been like, I can just totally relate, or they've said just like, you've really spoken to me, or like that exact thing happened to me in lockdown. I get that all the time. Like I had this moment with this thing, and you literally like, I feel seen, is what a lot of people have said. And I was like, I'm so glad, because in that moment you do feel incredibly alone, like when something like that is happening to you. And that's pretty incredible. And then that's another reason that I'm doing it, but like that's come from sharing it.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to ask you about there. The first one though is that you mentioned that you've already taken it to Edinburgh, and you mentioned that the show, you're still continuing to work on it. And I'm curious about the title change as well. I wanted to ask you about the original title. So let's start with the title first. What made you pick the original title, and do you know what the new title is going to be, or are you testing out possibilities?
I've got both. Okay. The simple answer to that question is one made sense and one did not. Okay. So the original title is called Let She Be. And Let She Be was an amalgamation of sayings, because I tend to get things mixed up in my head. So leave her be, let it happen and let it be. But she isn't in there. So, which is crazy. So it's just like, it doesn't quite make sense, but explaining that at the beginning of the show actually became a huge part of the show. I think when I was doing the application, and like when I was trying to think about what the title of the show would be, it made you think like, I was thinking about various different things, like a combination of like, what is the show and how do I sell it? But I don't think I did either of those things with the original title, but I think that's funny in itself, because that's life. That happens, that you're not going to do your first show isn't going to be exactly what you want it to be, but you would hope for a title that makes sense. Hence why the next title is called Break It Down. So that's what I've called it, because it's so simple. It's my name, Aalex Mandel-Dallal, break it down, and then there'll be friends at the show as well, so it's Break It Down with friends, and then that's also very much what happens in the show as well. So very simple, and that was it. Like I tend to overcomplicate things in my head, hence the title Let She Be. So the Break It Down really does, like, it does what it says on the tin.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. And why else do you think you're so interested in continuing to work on this show? And the context that I asked that in is that sometimes, and from talking to other people who are creating shows, it can seem like once you've taken a show to Edinburgh, there's some kind of weird unspoken thing that's supposed to be the one time. Or once you've performed a show for this amount of time, I don't know, maybe sometimes people actually get bored of performing it and want to leave it, but other times there's the pressure that it should be a new show. So what do you think is your thinking? Because I think it's super interesting and really relevant. What's your thinking behind wanting to continue to develop it and take it back?
So I think there's always so much advice that's shared as to like what to do, and you have to be very careful in who you speak to and what feels authentic to you. I felt like I was determined to get there last year, but that the show wasn't where I wanted it to be for what it could be based on the subject. And I felt like I wasn't the comedian that I wanted to be yet. And then I realized that and as I said before, like processing what happened, I'm in a very different stage of my life now. So there'll be a totally different approach to the same subject. But a lot of people, I mean, you are told that you can't, that you shouldn't take a show back or whatever. That was definitely something that was said to me on several occasions. But I decided I was just like, I'm not done with this. There's there's more to this. It's still like my baby and my truth. But what's happened now is like, I am still continuing to write the show for Edinburgh, but I'm also developing a new show, which will either be my show for Edinburgh next year. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's about something that I'm going through right now. And so if I go back to what I was saying before and like how I process things in my life and things I'm understanding in the few years that I've been doing comedy now, is you process the thing that happens. It happens, you process it, sorry. It happens, you process it, and you have your own like personal moment with it that you don't need to share with anyone. And then you decide how to communicate that if you choose to share it. So for me, it's like I'm going through something now. I will be ready to share that hopefully next summer. Or like by the beginning of next year, because I'm going through it right now. Whereas it took me 6 months to get to the next point of my life when I felt like I was comfortable to share that recording. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do it before that. I mean, I had the lockdown breakdown in January. I would have had to confirm the Edinburgh show. If I were to do it that year, I would have had to confirm the Edinburgh show like February, March. And so can you imagine if I was like, just the idea of going through something like that, and then having to like be like, no, this is going to be my show. That to me is mental. It's like you've got to have your own process, and for me, the process is not complete. So I am really looking forward to what the new version will be. And I think a lot of other comedians do it. It's just like, whether it's like, if you were to look at like whether you're debuting or anything like that, like your good material, like you write better jokes as time goes on, but you've also still got the other ones that maybe not a lot of people have heard because you're not that well known. So it's however you choose to do it. There are no official rules. And especially with like free fringes and everything, that's your time to play. Like that's when not everybody's watching. And the way that I look at it is like, people don't care if I'm doing a show twice. Like they don't. There's no one like, hey, that comedian Alex, she's doing the same show that she did last year. It's like, no one cares. I don't think that there's anyone out there that thinks that at all. And yeah, so if there are people that return that came to it last year, they will be getting a new show. So yeah, that's the way I've approached it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And do you have any like favorite questions that you like to ask people to get the kind of feedback that's helpful to you when you're in this process of developing and redeveloping material? Like when friends or colleagues come and see it, what kinds of questions do you like to ask them afterwards to get good feedback or good honest answers?
I absolutely love feedback in a really, I don't know if that's a normal way. After every work in progress that I did, I gave everyone a feedback form with 4 questions on it. It was like, they were quite simple questions. It wasn't like, did you like the show? It was like, what did you enjoy most about the show? What did you enjoy least about the show? What didn't you understand? And what stood out to you? I think those were the 4 questions. And I edited that nearly every show. I edited the questions that I had, but it was always around that. And then I said, you can leave your name at the bottom or you can be anonymous. So that was the process for all audiences. I don't know if people do that. And I know that people make notes just based on how people laugh in their work in progresses. And that's totally black and white. But my show, I didn't want it to just be just laugh. There's more, a little bit more to the narrative. So I knew that, and only recently learned, like, the lulls aren't that people aren't enjoying it. It's just like that's the nature of the show. It's not just a pure stand-up. And then also every preview I did, or every work in progress I did, making sure there was one person in the audience that I had said to previously, like, do you mind giving me notes at the end? And then they will choose what notes that they give to me. It won't be, or if there was something specific in that, that particular show, I was like, this bit isn't quite right. And I just, most of the time it was down to, like, does the narrative make sense? Because especially after the mistake I made of not giving the audience permission to laugh, it took someone saying the reason that didn't work is because, like, you were playing us your breakdown, but we didn't know if it was okay to laugh about the things that we found funny in it. And it was like, oh my God, I didn't even see that. And so, like, you've got to have your own process, but, like, I just, like, love I love hearing, like, reading through those feedback forms, even, like, it's how that helps me see interpretation as well, because everything that you do, like, everything that you say on stage can be interpreted in loads of different ways based on the audience member's perspective on the subject that you're speaking about. And that's super interesting in itself.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I love that. And I haven't actually heard of anyone else doing that, but that's awesome. What a great process.
And share the document if anyone wants it.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Because I was also going to ask you, and I can see how that feedback might help, but I still want to ask anyway, in terms of how you calibrate it, is how you, like, really judge for yourself whether you're making a show, like, better, in inverted commas, or just different. And I'm asking that from the point of view of someone who, like, I'm working on fiction, writing novels, and there'll be times where I'm trying to incorporate feedback that I've had from someone. And before I send it back, I might be doing multiple versions, and I'll have the same scene labeled A, B, C, D, E, F. And that gets to a point where I'm like, I don't know if this is better or just different at this point until I send it back. Is there a way that you calibrate for yourself as you're developing this show and this material as to whether it feels like it's moving in the direction you want, or if it's just a different version? That's not an easy question. So I'm selfishly asking it to help myself get better at it.
No, it's a great question, though, because I don't know if you find, but there's always a moment or I found there were several moments in the process where I'm like, have I totally lost what I was originally doing? Because and then you're just like, oh, wait a minute, like, and then I always found myself having to go back to referring to one question, like the reason that I'm doing it, or what is the character of me in this case, or like the character in the fiction, like what are they setting out to get? What are they aiming for? Because there always has to be a character, and they're usually, like, working towards something, otherwise nothing happens. So I'm constantly trying to go back to that question, especially because my brain will always go a million different ways. And I think there was even one point in my process, in the process of writing the show, where I got totally lost, and I ended up asking friends and, like, comedy friends, and if they knew of anyone that could just look at the show from an outsider's perspective, never seen it before, look at a recording of it and give notes, because I just needed someone that didn't know me and that that had worked doing something like that before, just to have a look at it, so I wasn't totally losing my mind. So, like, in that sense, like, almost like an outsider's perspective. In this case, it was someone that had worked with comedy before, but sometimes the outsider's perspective might even make you say, oh, well, that's their perspective on it, and I don't agree with that, but actually that's made me realise that this is the direction that I wanted it to go in to begin with. That's definitely what I found my process to be so far.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you use the word character, and I'm curious, because obviously I use that in fiction because it's really clearly a character, though is it really, or how much of us is it ourselves in there just dressed up in a different form? But where it's with you, where is literally you on stage, and then you have the, like, literal tape of you. Do you think of the you that's on stage, not the tape, as being a character, a persona version of Alex? Because you've also mentioned, like, truth so many times, but does it need to be, because I don't have that stand-up experience, do you think about shaping it as a persona or character, or does it just feel like you, the same as it would be if you were in that corporate room or with a friend?
There is me on stage as a version of me. It's an exaggerated version of me, and I love that because she usually says what I want to say, and that's maybe within certain situations isn't okay to say. Yeah. So there's like way less censorship, which is so much more fun than the normal everyday having to work in an office, Alex. And then, what was I saying? Oh, this is. Sorry, you go.
No, you were doing great. So, because I was asking about whether you were saying like it feels like an exaggerated version of you, an uncensored version of you.
And then the recording. So I think that there's still like, there isn't a very thin line with like self-preservation. But you have to, as a performer, I think it's really important that you know that. So if I had played that recording too soon, I would have felt that in my heart. Like, I think I would have just been like, oh no, I've made a really bad decision here because it hurts to play this out to an audience full of people that are laughing. And I learned that through mistakes and definitely things happening in my life. Bringing it onto stage, doing like a new material night and being like, this is my joke about the person that broke my heart recently, and then no one laughing and you being like, oh, I'm just airing my pain on stage and it was not ready. That's definitely happened. So like you've just kind of got to know your lines and like who the character is. And that was, I'm sorry, my phone just buzzed off because I didn't put it on airplane mode.
No worries. No worries. But that's actually that was the last thing that I wanted to ask you about before we move on to advice, is that I know that you do you do new material and jokes in those shorter formats as well, at those kind of live nights. You've mentioned when we had a brief chat before about doing like those 5-minute spots. What is different for you in how you think about like what material you take to those occasions versus what your take to something where you do have that whole scope of like the comedy hour narrative? What's different for you in your comedy, do you think?
So there is like an element of freedom that you have in those 5 minutes, because I guess it's lower stakes. Like you haven't got like worked really hard to get all of those people into a room to listen to you for 45 minutes to an hour. Like you haven't got their attention for very long. So in that time, you have to decide as a performer. There have been times when I've gone on and I've just done purely new stuff. But even actually, to be fair, even when I've done that, I've still opened with a line that I know that it's going to get a laugh. So that was the way that I chose to do it that time. But I also learned from those moments, because I was just like, well, maybe I'll do stuff that I know that works mixed with some new stuff. But what I have always struggled to do, and still to this day have not done, is being able to play out the recording in a 5-minute set, not even a 10-minute set, and especially with like a room full of people that, or like an audience that I don't know, or I don't always necessarily know my whole audience, but I just don't know what type of audience I'm going to get that night, and you've got to really like carefully. I had to quite carefully plan like when I was doing new material specifically for the show. And then I think but that's also a very different way of doing it, because I think most comedians, when they're working on their initial, especially like pure stand-up, when you're working on your first 45 or a half hour show, like whatever format you're choosing to do your in like first Edinburghs or whatever festivals you're doing, it's usually like a build up of your 5 minutes, 5 on 5 on 5, and then you've got your 30, but from my side, it was like most of the show is me talking the audience through a recording that I can't then play to audiences, because the vibe would be like just the idea of like doing like there are shows like gong shows. So the gong show format is you have 5 minutes, sometimes 2 minutes leeway, But within those 5 minutes, the audience, like 5 people nominated in the audience that represent the whole of the audience, have the ability to gong you off stage. And I always thought, like, can you imagine if I was just like, hi, I'm Alex, this is my breakdown, and then just see what happens? So that would have been like the boldest move in the world. And it did go through my mind at one point, and I was like, no, there's the self-preservation thing again, because you've got to, there's the line, there it is, yeah. So it's like working out when the right, but there were some really nice new material nights where I knew I could try certain jokes that were definitely for the show, but then it's also, then the rest of it was like adding like stand up into other sets that were setting me up as a character differently, but then using it in the other show. But then like, it's just how you develop the show is up to you in terms of like what works best for you. Because for me, I love trying new stuff all the time. I'm not like that one joke works, keep doing that one joke, because I get very bored of my material very quickly, which is definitely much to my own detriment. But it really is, everyone's got their own process. So, yeah.
No, that's super helpful. And thank you. You've been so generous, giving us such a lovely sense of your process today. And I think it's so useful to hear those different processes. And we all have such different brains and ways of looking at the world. And it's great to kind of hear what those are and like what's really working for you, and you being so bold in finding out what's working for you and making mistakes and failing and then getting back up and trying again, which is like absolutely inevitable for anyone who's brave enough and wants to do comedy. It's the only way through. So I love that. But you've also got this really personal route through, which is awesome. So thank you for sharing that so generously. I'd love to
always think about I always think about the thin line between bold and mad.
Oh. Do you think?
Thin line. You've got to figure out what side you're on.
Yeah, and claim the bold as much as possible, I reckon.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And so I've just got a couple of questions before we wrap up. And one is, I'd love, just super curious what you enjoy comedy-wise, whether there's any shows that you love to watch or things that you love to read or different stand-ups. Like, what's to your taste? What do you enjoy?
Always love a biography. I want to know someone's story, like how they got to where they are now. So like with stand-up, I especially like love that. I mean, there's usually always a story running through it, but I like the bigger questions, like when someone's life significantly changed. A show that, I mean, just to go back to a show that I loved where someone like really, not necessarily doing that, but then they really challenged themselves, was Alex Edelman, Just for Us.
I don't know that.
That was an amazing show. He's actually, I think it's still touring now, and it was at Edinburgh in 2019, where he put himself into. Oh, I almost like I don't want to.
Okay, I've written it down.
Too much of it away, but it's like it's a great. That was a really fantastic show where he pushed his boundaries, and then the story of it was the show. And then I'm trying to think about like what I've seen recently, shows or books I've read. Oh, and actually I'm reading at the moment Stephen King's On Writing, which is I'm sure something that you've read, but was actually recommended to me by a performer, and it is incredible because it's his story in relation to, like, it's his journey and his story and how he got into writing. And then it goes on to the practical side. I think the book's split up in such an amazing way. But like for me, that was, there's a personal story there. I love to hear people's personal stories in relation to like their superpower, I guess. So like how they got to where they are now and reach that next level. So I think
that's awesome. Yeah, I think the first time I read On Writing, I think I came at it really impatiently. I think at the time I was like, just tell me what to do. I just need to know what to do so I could get on and do it. And it's really not that kind of book. And then it was re-recommended to me and I went back to it comparatively recently and listened on audiobook and I loved it. It was so brilliantly read and at that pace and the way, like you say, established the sort of personal story and then like brought in the craft. I think I was ready for it and I just loved it. So yeah, I think that's a cool one to bring up, and I've written down the other one too. I'm definitely going to have to check out that show. And I'm really curious to ask you now what your superpower is, because I've had so many questions, but I actually wrote that down as one when you were talking about how your brain works, and you saying that you feel like you say sometimes you overcomplicate things, but that's also another way of saying that you can see many ways that things could go. So I'm curious what you would think your superpower is.
I think, oh, I mean, yeah, I'm so used to saying that, but I'm like, what is mine?
Yeah.
I think when this is actually something that I've assessed a fair bit recently, I think that my superpower is, and I don't like using the terminology, but it is essentially like I forget things really easily. So I'm constantly, so if for example, if I've seen a show and I didn't, even if I enjoyed it, I might forget that I've seen that show and book in to see that show again 2 years later. Like a child, and it would be like a child that I've just literally totally forgotten that I'd seen it. And so it's, so I guess my superpower is seeing things. So I guess it's seeing things and not remembering that I've seen them, but then seeing them with and the reason I say child, it's like, almost with a childlike gaze, like I'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
I don't know, does that make, because and that's just because I am super forgetful. I think I was watching a film the other day, and I was like, I don't remember any of this. I think it was Shakespeare in Love, which is so random. And I was like, I don't think I've seen this film. And I got to the end, there was one specific bit, and I was like, I watched this in lockdown, and that wasn't that long ago, and I just couldn't remember it at all. So I guess it's like also kind of because of that, a basic bitch mentality, because I don't remember half the things that I've done. So I'm going in with like a kind of naive, simple way of looking at it, because I don't remember half of the things that I've done.
No, I can see how that would be. Yeah, no, I see how that would be really fun, and for comedy to have that freshness as well. And I may be wrong, I may be projecting, but then I would also imagine then the things that really do stick, that you keep coming back to as well, must take on even greater significance. But I think how lovely to have that fresh way of seeing things, because, and I think I really enjoyed that about your show too, is that it's not cynical, and I think obviously there's so many different kinds of comedy, but I loved that it had this it did have a fresh, generous energy to it. It didn't have the sort of jaded cynicism that some comics use as a defense. And like you say, we need to protect, but there's all different ways of kind of protecting. So that's lovely. I think that's a super cool superpower. Forget
that. Yeah, no, I've forgotten that, so I'll just do that all over again.
I'll have you back on in a year and test you. And be like, Alex. So it'll be like one of those quiz shows where I'm like, tell me, what was your superpower? What did you say? Awesome. And I
honestly will not remember. Yeah. Sorry. I won't remember what happened at the beginning of this series.
No problem. So. That's a good thing with the podcast, is you can listen back, so it's all good. Last question for you is just whether there is any advice that you've been given that you found useful, whether it's from things that you've read, like your biographies, or whether it's from other comics or friends, or even just that you figured out yourself.
There was on writing, there were so many things, like pages that I folded to remember things. But there was one amazing thing that has always stuck with me, was not even comedy related, I guess. Jill Scott, who is a singer. She was interviewed before going on stage after Erykah Badu, and then I think an interviewer asked, "Are you scared about going on stage after Erykah Badu?" And she said something along the lines of this. I can't quote the exact quote, but it's such an amazing quote. It's we all have our own sense of queendom, our own uniqueness, our own thing, and mine can never be compared to hers, and hers can never be compared to mine. Mine can never be, yeah, I did say that right.
Yeah.
Which is such, I go in with that with everything, especially when I'm watching other comedians. I'm like, oh my God, they're so good. It's but you're going to be good in your own way, and someone else will have a take on the way that you're doing something. And that is that's kind of like a blinkers on mentality. It's just you just have to, and that's actually relates to another thing that a bit of advice, which is Sarah Pascoe did this amazing introduction to stand-up Instagram thing, which is an hour long, and her thing was to celebrate your uniqueness. And like, that is just the only thing that you can do. It's just like, otherwise you would just merge into another person, and you have to like your uniqueness. And I think she said otherness as well, which I thought was great. So those are two amazing pieces of advice that weren't personally given to me, but like that I heard that really stuck with me.
I love those. Yeah, those are great. I think as creatives, that's just perfect advice. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. I'll put these in the show notes, but also just for those that might be out and about listening, where should they go to find out more about you and your work?
I think I've just discovered, what's the name? The Linktree. Because I put everything onto that one where, so that's like got everything that I'm doing. So if I've got any gigs, sometimes so everything that's going on with Edinburgh, all my previews for that, and any projects that I'm working on, and they will all go on there. I think that's how it works. I'm sure that I'm doing something wrong with how to promote myself, or maybe that will, I don't know anything about SEO. I'm not going to go into that now. But spelling my name with 2 A's is really important to say, because no one can ever find me on the internet, because they're like, I can't find you. And it's like, because it's both a blessing and a curse spelling your name with 2 A's. But yeah, so to find me on Instagram or anything like that, it's spelt with 2 A's.
Wonderful. And obviously when I post this podcast, you'll be able to find it at comedymasterclass.com. All Alex's links will be there, and they will also be filtered through to all the places this podcast shows up where you can listen and watch. So thank you so much for your time today, Alex. It's been so fun talking to you.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you.